Hi there, everyone. This is Wiley Jones. For those of you that don't know me, I am a current senior at the University of Illinois. Um, kind of put together a few slides on my opinions on device convergence. I'm going to get into what that actually even means, but really it just kind of started out as I was wanting to formalize some of my opinions and kind of doing some thinking. Had a few slides, a couple of graphs I had been making, and then realized that I could kind of turn it into a little bit more of a cohesive presentation. So figured I'd go over that and share that with everyone. Feel free to comment, send back, send back any commentary, any thoughts. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Uh, Other than that, really, this is kind of a big discussion on high-level discussion on the trends I'm seeing in mobile phones, smartphones, PCs, and then how I'm using them. So creating, consuming, what the balance is like, and how that's kind of driving PCs and phones into very specific use cases and form factors. And I'll kind of dive more into that next. This was kind of what started it all. I created this slide when I was talking to a friend about some of my opinions on where we've gone to and where we've come from with smartphones and with PCs over the past, for the past smartphones. I guess the iPhone actually turned 10. It turns 10 in a couple days, and where we've come from since then, where we came from before with looking at bricks, the Nokia brick, things like that. And then as way far back as PCs back in the 80s, and then where we went through with desktops, laptops, and now the really interesting MacBook Pro and Surface Studio. Kind of the full circle of those types of devices as well. So, kind of outlining this graph, we've got basically two axes that are not exactly intuitive, so I'll kind of put together my opinions on those. We have creation and consumption. So consumption on the y-axis there, it's effectively, exchanging information on a device. So how you're reading something, you're viewing something for maybe an extended period of time, but the purpose of what you're doing is generating or exchanging some type of information, right? And really the end goal for you is consuming that. So I would actually even throw communications into this. So texting, things like that, I would kind of put under consumption. But obviously, what should jump out to you is viewing media, looking at photos, viewing video, listening to music, the kind of obvious things that you would expect from stuff like Netflix, YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, podcasts, all that kind of stuff. But also kind of other things where you're looking at articles, looking at stuff on Facebook and Twitter. You're not doing a lot of output related work, but it's more about consuming things and taking things in. On the other end, creation is maybe a little bit more intuitive, but it's when you're trying to create some type of output, and the goal of that output is not exactly an exchange of information. So yes, there is an output in sending an email or a text, but I'm talking more about things like creating presentations, going through data in Excel, or sending longer emails, sending memos, drafting up notes, taking notes, things like that, where the work is more detail focused and anti-pattern based. So you're not following a typical tapping boxes and clicking and dragging, and it is more clicking and dragging actually. So it's a little bit less of just random taps here and there, random clicks here and there, but actually more about going through some type of process to create something. And so really what a lot of the nitty-gritty of this kind of slide is here is that there's a future for mobile and there's a future for PCs, and kind of following current trends, like how can we predict and kind of project out like where we think these are going, and these are very opinion based. The size of the circles kind of represents like the total number of units out there and the growth of the number of devices. So PC growth has stayed pretty flat over recent years and it's trending negative. Mobile device growth has been really strong, and maybe it's just slowing down a little bit, but it's still growing pretty strongly. And kind of what we've seen is really that smartphones have become a go-to for consumption, especially with improved connectivity and LTE data. You're looking at larger screen sizes now. People are watching Netflix, they're viewing all types of other articles, listening to music, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. You're doing that on your smartphone first, and really specific creative applications, things like Excel, things like PowerPoint, things like Photoshop, when you're going through and trying to do very high throughput work where you're really trying to crank out and do a lot, you kind of go to your MacBook Pro, you go to your laptop, you go to your PC at work. But a lot of like the, um, typical operations that you're doing and exchanging information, it's no longer done on your PC the way it was back in the day, but it's done on your smartphone or your tablet. And it's actually allowed us to create a gap where we're consuming way more on our smartphones than we ever did on our PCs when they were actually capable of the same thing in the past. There was a time when, your PCs were just as fast as current smartphones, or as slow, so to speak. But we were actually using them less for consumption simply because the interface wasn't conducive to being mobile. So it's kind of something that really what I'm kind of postulating here is that the future of mobile is high consumption and relatively high creation, where you can do about 90% of the creative things, and that's going to kind of put PCs in a really interesting little box down in the bottom right, where you're not really using them to consume a lot, to exchange information and generate small tidbits of information, but using them for very high throughput, intricate, like detail-oriented creative work. So you're creating really intricate presentations, you're doing lots of like creative work in like things like iMovie or PowerPoint or Photoshop, stuff like that. And then you're doing like very high compute work, like engineering level work where you're working in CAD, you're working programming, things like that, where the nature of the work is directly tied to an interface and directly tied to like very advanced compute. So kind of formalizing some of those notes, some of the comments I've just made in notes, that we actually do have 2.5 billion smartphones right now out there, 5 billion mobile devices, versus 1 billion PCs, and kind of seeing the new scale that we're reaching in computing in terms of the number of units. Point one to mobile, it's really it is becoming the backbone of like technology, and it's actually becoming more pervasive in society than really anyone would have expected. But and its growth is still positive, which is crazy. PC growth's gone negative, like I was kind of mentioning that. This isn't super surprising, especially because a lot of people now walk around with computers in their pockets that are just as powerful as a lot of computers were only a few years ago. Looking at mobile phone screen sizes, this kind of explains a lot of the growth that we've seen in consumption. So what we're looking at there is that a lot of people have gone from the size of like an iPhone 4 to an iPhone 5, which is the 4-inch, to iPhone 6, which is 4.7, and now we're even looking at 5.5-inch screens, like things like the Galaxy Note, things like the iPhone Plus size series. It's allowed you to watch Netflix on your phone more comfortably, watch YouTube on your phone more comfortably. You're reading articles in a way that doesn't feel like constrained, confined, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this is actually kind of really allowing. This has been like a major driver of growth that hasn't gotten enough credit, I think. But I'll kind of maybe get into this a little bit more later. But we're seeing some really interesting stuff about how people are developing preferences and how those preferences might change in the future. So kind of the end-all be-all statement that I kind of want to basically leave you with as regarding this chart is that mobile consumption is driving PCs into specific use cases. So PCs are not defining themselves right now. Mobile is pushing PCs. PCs are now used for very high precision activities, like I was talking about with Photoshop. People are doing it for graphic design and visual design. The advanced interface, whether it be like a touchscreen, dial-looking thing with the new Surface Studio, and the touch bar on the new MacBook Pros, and again, high compute, right? You can't really run a CAD software where you're designing parts for a car on your phone, right? And I kind of actually want to get into an interesting dichotomy there and kind of some distinctions, but really the idea is that mobile's consumption and how mobile is fulfilling our need for consumption and actually expanding the amount we're consuming, that is driving PCs into creation specific use cases. So what's pushing mobile then? If we maybe want to get into PCs later, but what actually is it that's kind of pushing mobile forward and is going to actually push them into what I'll kind of call as the future of mobile, or that green box on the previous chart? Really, it's a couple of things, but it boils down to hardware, software, and then connectivity. And when I say connectivity, I mean like your data, your connection, your access to the internet, right? Your access to communicate with others. In hardware, It's maybe a little bit more obvious. We've got the processors, the engine, which for mobile is ARM as opposed to x86, and I'll kind of get into that in a minute. And then screen sizes, they're converging. 5.5 inch, I think, is going to become the new standard in the future. Maybe probably 3 years out, we'll see it kind of begin to dominate. Software, automation, and AI are going to be really driving basically this movement towards mobile being more creative and being more enabled to be creative. And these creation-centric tools, things like Excel, things like making PowerPoints, even like Adobe Photoshop, stuff like that, they were originally made for PCs. They were intended to have these advanced big interfaces, keyboards, mice, screens that are larger than your hand. The user experience and interface needs to be refactored so that it can kind of align with the mobile paradigm. That's a really interesting point that I think we're beginning to see like a lot of strong indication that it's coming true already. Connectivity. This one is a really hard thing to discuss concisely, but I really think mobile consumption right now is being strangled and choked out by how hard it is to get data. Data is not cheap, and everyone knows that. It's cheap in some places in the world, and we actually see some interesting differences in those places. And then what happens when data becomes cheap? Does consumption go up? Answer is yes. So I think right now we can kind of see that internet service providers and like their ability to limit our connectivity, or maybe they wouldn't put it that way, but that's kind of the way I view it. That's actually a really interesting limiting factor that as that eventually opens up, it'll allow mobile to expand. So diving into kind of the computing, the guts and the brain and the heart of your smartphones. You look at ARM, you look at x86. x86 is the architecture of the computing CPUs that you kind of see in laptop devices, PCs. That's your Intels, your AMDs. And then ARM is what's in your phone. It's on SoCs, systems on chips. And what a lot of people like kind of gripe about is that your phone is not fast enough to run XYZ applications, right? Certain things. Yes, some applications are currently computationally limited by ARM, but this doesn't seem to be the case for long. So I kind of charted out basically performance over time of the various chips that Apple has been introducing. So Apple builds their own chips, something they started doing in about 2009-ish, 10-ish. They acquired a company called PA Semi, and they started working on putting their own chips in their phones, which was an interesting move that a lot of people were very critical of initially, but it seems to be working for them pretty well, as they're actually really showing strong growth in performance. This is a single core performance. Multi-core performance is very different, but a lot of the operations you're running on your phone from the day-to-day are actually determined by single core performance. So I had to choose one, so I chose that. But what you're seeing here is basically that, I mean, that's like a 2.5x increase in performance from the iPhone 5S to the iPhone 7. The A7 to the A10 was that dramatic of a difference that it doesn't look like it's kind of curb off either. I mean, obviously, past prediction is never indicative of future performance, but what we're seeing here is really strong growth, and comparing it to benchmarks for x86-based processors like the Intel i7 looks great, like looks really strong. It doesn't seem that in the near future there will be any more reason to continue to believe that advanced compute applications are going to be limited by ARM core chips. So kind of repeating that is just that ARM has a chance to break through and become a suitable computational engine for high compute applications. And I think that kind of really says it all, is that phones can be the backbone of computing if we give them enough time over the next few years. So the next thing with kind of looking at the interface on phones, obviously the real interface is the touchscreen and the size of that screen. Capacitive touch has been great. I think a lot of people have gotten really comfortable with using it and moving away from keys like on the old Blackberries. While there hasn't been a lot of improvement of the capacitive touchscreens, I don't think that's a really big issue. The big thing is figuring out what size the screen needs to be so that it can balance that mobile experience where you can put it in your pocket and go, and also having it be big enough to where you can do a lot of things on it and not feel like you need to be using a tablet or using a laptop. So the chart here really is just showing the average size of the screens for each quarterly sales of iPhones. So this isn't trying to say that this should be the size of the screen and like this should be what people need. This is kind of showing more that what has like the life cycle of various iPhone sizes done to really preferences and like what do people prefer. So I kind of put together some information here. We basically see that with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus release, the average size of the screen that people were buying was way bigger, massive jump. Mostly because they quit selling the 4s as much and because people upgraded from 5s, which were 4 inches, to 6s and 6 Pluses, which were 4.7 and 5.5 inches. Massive jump, very big, about 0.5 inches almost. This slowly curved off, and actually another interesting point is that on the 6S and 6S Plus release, and after that whole sales cycle almost no movement. So the same amount of people that were upgrading from bigger phones, the preferences stayed roughly the same. And I think a lot of people would misconstrue this and kind of take the state and say, hey, people are really like satisfied. Some people like the 5.5 inch and the bigger screens. Most people prefer the 4.7 inch, and some people prefer the smaller ones, the 4 inch, on the iPhone 5s and now the iPhone SE. But I do think that's actually maybe not correct entirely. I do think we're going to see more growth and that actually the 5.5 inch will become the new standard. I think it's still quote unquote crossing the chasm. It's trying to bridge and achieve that whole user base, and there's some really reluctant people like me. I have an iPhone 6 and they're kind of saying, oh, it's too big. Like, I don't really know if that's going to be suitable to me being mobile with this phone. It kind of takes away the point of it being a phone as opposed to a tablet. I even had a friend who had a 6 Plus, and we always made fun of him by calling his phone a tablet. But really, I think we see that maybe this actually does have a chance. The 7 Plus, and maybe even looking forward at like things like the 8 Plus and looking at the Galaxy Note, stuff like that. A lot of the room to grow is going to occur when the price drops. Right now, the larger size phones are obviously more expensive. Maybe giving it another sales cycle, the iPhone 7, 7 Plus, and then how many 6 Pluses people are buying during that time, it kind of might allow us to move the needle a little bit more. That's my opinion. I'm not sure really. There's really no evidence to support, quantitatively that might be true, but just by talking to people, every single person I've ever met that's bought a larger size phone, like 5.5 inch phones, they've all said that they got used to it very quickly and that they are never going back. I experienced the exact same thing when I went from a 5 to a 6, an iPhone 5 to an iPhone 6. I really don't think that there's any reason for me to suggest that this would not continue, especially because it really does allow such greater levels of consumption and creation. Really, this is a really interesting point. I think that people will begin to accept the 5.5 inch size screens as kind of the standard over the next 3 years. And so kind of keep an eye on maybe like what Apple ends up kind of thinking about regarding this. Moving over to software, automation and AI are going to be a really big part of allowing people to be more creative with their mobile phones as opposed to just consuming with it. Really good example of this, something very basic, is the Explore feature in the new Google Sheets and Slides. I'm a big fan of Google Sheets, big fan of Google Slides. I made all these presentations in Slides, keep track of some things in Sheets, but using their mobile app has been kind of annoying. It's kind of only like you look at things on it. Recently, actually, I used it to keep track of my hours I was studying for the GRE. And I actually wanted to make a chart to see if I was tracking towards like the cumulative hours I wanted to study. And I highlighted all the data, and there was this button that said Explore. It came up, I clicked on it, and it made me like 8 different charts that I could swipe through and check and see if any of them were exactly what I wanted. The first one was exactly what I wanted. So I kind of was like, okay, this is interesting. I hadn't seen this before. This was actually one of the points that kind of prompted me to talk about creating for mobile, but I'm kind of starting to see this a little bit more overall more frequently. Things in email, like the AI assistants that are kind of creating like scheduling and stuff like that for you. it really is going to be interesting to see how this plays out. This is really early, and obviously companies like Google are going to have a little bit of a head start, maybe, but it really will be interesting to see how other people begin to bring AI into like allowing for more creative applications in mobile phones. As far as refactoring goes, this is, I think, really where a lot of the big wins could be in moving towards mobile as far as software goes on phones. Really, there's a lot of great software out there. There's a lot of great companies that have built great software for PCs, for enterprise, creative, those types of applications. They just need to be refactored. And I know that is like a terrible way of putting it, because it's not just refactoring; it's rebuilding from the ground up. But it's refactoring the interface, right? Salesforce is a great example of people that are already pushing this to the kind of limits. They've basically redone their entire platform that was on the PCs and allowed it so that you can have it on mobile. They have analytics. They have all these awesome dashboards. You can do lead generations and accounts and all kinds of crazy stuff with it. It really is impressive, because something like sales, where you're constantly mobile, you're constantly on the move and traveling, it's obvious that working towards having a mobile platform that is just as good as your PC platform, that's obvious that would be a big win for clients, and that would be something that people really want. So other companies, I think you're going to start beginning to see them refactoring a lot of things that you assume to be, oh, this is something you do on a PC. You do Excel on a PC. You do all your CAD and your Photoshop. You do those on PCs. We're going to eventually begin to see people refactoring these and rebuilding and repackaging those types of experiences in ways that are more fluid and effortless in a mobile paradigm. A lot of things I think people are going to initially reject and say, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't seem like an easy way of doing this, but I think those are going to begin to change eventually. Again, it'll be an eventual slow kind of gradual process, but I do believe that really this is a really interesting kind of strong movement that we can't ignore. And people will say like, oh, you need a computer to do a CAD. I fundamentally disagree. You just need a mouse and you need a keyboard. It's about the interface, and if you can use those types of interfaces on a phone or reproduce them in a way with touch, we're talking about some very different things. Interesting side notes on here. As far as things like software engineering go, it's really funny because I have a couple of friends who work in DevOps. One guy's also a software engineer, works as kind of a front end engineer. Multiple times he's told me, "Oh yeah, I've made commits via my phone as I've gotten in an Uber to go out to bars," and that would be something that you would have initially expected. No, you need to get on your computer. You need to get into your terminal. You need to commit via that way. He's doing it from his phone. I have another friend who was he works as a DevOps engineer. He was monitoring the network from his phone while he was sitting hanging out with us. Didn't have to get his laptop out and sit and keep an eye on things. We were even able to go out to the bars, brought his backpack, has his laptop with him, but he was able to monitor and kind of do his job, stay on duty, just by keeping an eye on his phone. And kind of seeing movement in things that people would say, no, that's not possible. You can't do that. Really, people are challenging the assumptions at a very foundational level, and we're going to see this slowly rolling out. So, departing from hardware and software, looking more at the burden no longer on the phone companies and the software companies themselves, but people who provide the internet service providers. I think phones and hardware and software and all those types of things are the fire and the wood. Data and internet connection is the oxygen, and it's suffocating. It's not growing the way it could be, just because certain internet service providers make it a little bit harder to get data in certain parts of the world than it possibly should be. We have some infrastructure problems. We're not moving towards 5G as fast as we probably should be. There's a lot of concerns here and a lot to talk about, but I think the real proof that having more access to data will create really unique trends in consumption is kind of right here. You look at the total traffic you're seeing for internet consumption, it goes to the big media related companies. So YouTube, Netflix, Instagram, Pandora, Snapchat. I mean, they take up a large percentage of amount of the traffic and stuff we're seeing on the internet. And if you can make it easier to get access to these things via mobile, having better data plans, more unlimited data, so forth, people are going to be consuming more. And I know the same thing goes for me. Yeah, I would absolutely watch more YouTube videos and watch my friends' Snap stories if I had infinite amounts of data. But I have to kind of penny pinch, and I'll be like, oh, do I really want to watch this person's Snap story? No, I really don't. Maybe I'll wait until I get back on my Wi-Fi at home, right? Kind of the chart on the left, though, really interesting to show what happens when you do reduce the cost of data. So this study was, I think, based in Africa, and they were showing, I think it was in somewhere in Northern Africa, they were showing basically what happens when we make it free for people to get on Twitter. So cellular access in that 0 rating period, they basically said, okay, we're going to monitor the cellular access, the amount people are using the network, the cellular network, sorry, during this brief window, and we're going to tell them, hey, it's free to get on Twitter. Let's just keep a track on, keep an eye on what happens to traffic. It spiked, obviously. People kind of took a little bit of time to figure out, oh, wait, we can use this for free. And then it kind of tailed off. And then you can see kind of towards the end of it, people were using Wi-Fi more to access Twitter because they lost their ability to use their cellular device, in a way that would allow them to view Twitter on the go, right? Would the same thing occur with Netflix, YouTube, Facebook? Evidence suggests yes, absolutely. Even groups like YouTube are showing that 50% of like their views, I think, are coming from mobile devices, which feels like a lot. And I feel like that is only going to continue to go up as you give people access to more data. Obviously, you don't have a lot of really interesting statistics on this, but I think that's a really interesting point that maybe we'll see it come true. Potentially not, depending on how internet service providers want to behave. But overall, it's definitely an interesting thing to keep an eye on. So this is kind of something I mentioned earlier, but pretty easily summarized. What's going to push PCs into the future? What's pushing PCs into their new box, that green box, right? Well, simple answer: mobile. It's one thing, really. PCs aren't defining themselves anymore. They're being defined by their competition. The amount of pressure that mobile is putting on PCs to differentiate themselves is it's pushing them to being more creative, interface-driven types of applications. So what we see here is really just kind of the representation of this trend that interfaces are defining PC's progress. It's not about computing anymore. And I'll kind of explain what I mean by that in a second. But you look at the new types of dial pen like interfaces, the touch bar. They're trying to allow people to be more creative and to totally own the interface that is allowing them to create. Whether it be in CAD, whether it be in Photoshop, Adobe type applications, other types of designers, and in this one, movie producer type thing, movie director. I don't think it's as much about computing because, well, we haven't seen really great computing performance updates as they've gone into these next generations, but also because computing is largely being offloaded to the cloud. If whenever I want to run, I do a little bit of computer vision programming and have kind of done some stuff here and there. Whenever I do that I fire up an Amazon EC2 instance and I run it on that. I'm not even running it on my computer. So is it really even about the computing as much? Is it about your ability to have a 14-inch screen that you can look at things on and a touch bar that you can slide around with and having a mouse and a keyboard, right? I would argue that it is about the interfaces and the fact that our two main creators of PC interfaces are focusing on the interface is maybe a little bit indicative of that. So kind of tying this back to what we've discussed about mobile, can mobile interfaces continue to evolve? Can they become more creation specific? Absolutely. But what's pushing PCs into that high utility lower right corner of the chart we were looking at earlier, it really is the interface. It's not about the computing. It's not about really what people are doing with the PCs. It's about what people are doing with smartphones, and that's defining where PCs have to go. So kind of some closing thoughts. I threw these together a little bit late, but I wanted to really summarize kind of maybe some more bold opinions on what we're seeing here. Um, Moving forward, mobile is not going to be about how fast your device is. I think really it's going to be about your connectivity and can you connect to the cloud where computing will occur. So it's going to be an endpoint. It's going to be a screen where information is rendered. It's not going to be a device that is really doing a lot of heavy lifting itself. It really just needs to be fast enough to render what's coming in. And kind of on the other end, PCs, it's going to be used for high throughput, detail-oriented, anti-pattern based work and creative work, kind of what I discussed earlier. It's going to be about people creating things. It's going to be about people doing really tactile interface type work where you have to really be intricate and detailed and precise, things that you don't want to do on a 6-inch screen, something that you would want to do on a 24-inch screen with a 4K monitor, right? It's got maybe a little bit fuzzy as far as how the cloud fits into this, but kind of the last point I want to leave with is really that, if you're walking around with your phone and an iPad and your laptop or something in a backpack, you have 3 very powerful computers with connections to Wi-Fi and sometimes even data plans where you can connect to the internet via any type of LTE signal if you got clear view of the southern sky. Why do you need 3 very fast computers when the interface is usually the only thing that's limiting your ability to create or consume? So is my phone fast enough to run Excel? Absolutely. The reason I don't use it to do that, though, is because I like having the arrow keys and I like zipping around. Is my MacBook great for looking at movies because of the big screen? Yeah, it's decent, but I actually don't like laying in bed comfortably with it. So what are we going to converge to? It's going to converge to a new form factor for interfaces and a new form factor for computing. The phone, it's going to take on smaller computing and rely on the cloud to do a lot of the heavy lifting. The computers, they're going to become more stationary instead of less stationary. And you're seeing that kind of with the Surface Studio, things like that, that it's not as much about your ability to do like heavy lifting on the computer as it is about getting really good access to being able to use creative tools, things like those dials, things like those pens. They're becoming more application specific. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting points that are kind of pushing both of these mobile devices and PCs in different directions. But really, I think a lot of it is kind of tied back to like what I talked about is like that balance of creation and consumption. It's like, how do you use a device when when you are using it? What are you using it for? And kind of identifying my own uses of things. And I think I'm a little bit more even reasonable than other people I know that are streaming videos all the time on their phones and always watching Snapchat and stuff like that. As the current generation ages and goes out into the workforce and takes their habits with them, I think we're going to really see this kind of start to manifest. So, got a few references here. I'm going to upload these slides later. Obviously, like I said, drop comments in, ping me with anything, any type of information you've got. If you'd love to chat about this some more, obviously hit me up. Like I said, my name's Wiley, and I do other things for fun other than stuff like this, but this is one of my favorite things to do. So any type of conversation you'd like to talk, have about this, I'd love to chat.